Hello guys, welcome back to Archangel RC. So the time has finally come for that long-awaited review of the new MFD Flight Crosswind or Nimbus Pro. Still unsure exactly what the official name is, but I did finally get to fly the plane and I do have a few things to say about it, some very good and some not so much. Now, right off the bat, I do have to say that I got the plug-and-play version, and even so the plane comes completely unassembled, so nothing is done for you in the factory except for the control surface hinges, and congratulations on those. Saved me some time from having to install my own, and these do look like they would get the job done and should last. Putting the plane together is not too difficult, the parts fit very well. Only thing is you will need to provide the glue because it is not supplied with the kit. For some reason my plane did not come with an assembly manual, so I had to figure out where everything fit as the build progressed. Just keep that in mind, yours may not come with one either, but as soon as I am done with the post about this on my blog, you guys will have something of an assembly instructions to work off of. Overall, I am pretty happy with how this model is designed, and I didn't have to fix anything during the build process, which actually is becoming more common recently. Yes, there is that issue with the horizontal stabilizer, but I will get to that a bit later on. Having to install an FPV system will require modifications, but keep in mind that this plane, just like the Believer, is primarily designed for mapping purposes, so just like anything that has to be used outside of its designed purpose, it has to be modified. The tail locking mechanism is a bit weird, and at least for me it doesn't quite lock into place, so I use the screw to hold it securely in, and hopefully it will not let me down. As for the wing locks, I do like them because the wings themselves are very easy to put in and out. It is just that the locks are on the underside and you have to sort of feel for them to unlock them, but I don't think this is going to be too much of a problem. Doesn't particularly bother me. It is not like it takes 10 minutes to find them. Funny as it may seem, and following the great success I had with it on my Phoenix V2, I decided to go with an Omnibus F4 Pro board running Arduplane for this build, as it really is a super easy and convenient way to get a fully featured autopilot in almost any RC related project, and is cheap too. The only issue I am having with the firmware is that for some reason I am unable to calibrate the current sensor, so keep in mind that whatever is on the OSD screen needs to be roughly doubled to get the real amp draw. For a GPS I use the Radiolink TS100, seeing as it performs perfectly on my Nano Talon, and I also installed the antenna tracker board with its own GPS just so it doesn't have to rely on the autopilot's unit. Again, as usual, the compass is disabled and I will not be using it as it really is not needed on a plane. You should be well aware of my opinion on the matter by now. Simplicity is key, and even though these systems are anything but simple, I hardly see the need to complicate them further, and having a compass for me is a major pain in the behind. Now, for the Maiden Flight, I really didn't want to go too heavy with the FPV gear, so I literally fiber taped the camera and video transmitter to the fuselage and was done with it. My reasoning was, doesn't make sense to put much more effort into this right now before I have an idea of how this plane is going to perform and if it would be worth that extra effort. Just as I was doing the wiring, a new camera arrived, the Firefly Fortress FPV racing camera, which is a first for this manufacturer, and I thought it would be interesting to try it out. In all fairness, putting it on a plane like this probably isn't the best way to test a racing oriented camera, but nowadays they all are racing cameras, and honestly, image wise, I'm hard pressed to find any faults with it, and it does look on par with what I've personally seen from Runcam and Foxeer, with the exception that by default the colors are a tad warmer, which is actually better as they look a bit more natural. Can't comment anything on the delay yet, for that I will have to put it on the racing copter, but as I already mentioned, the image I got in the goggles is at least as good as the micro Runcam models. But enough sidetracking, we should get to flying, although I want to say just one more thing. Don't get raving on about how my receiver antennas are wrongly mounted and are not in an L shape, and how the VTX is too close to the receiver. As already mentioned above, temporary setup. And as already proven numerous times in some of my other videos, this receiver antenna placement has worked for me pretty well in the past for long range, so I'm sticking with it. And so we come to the flying field, and since I was alone at the time I had to start flying the plane, I decided to put my trust in the omnibus and the RG-plane code to auto-launch the plane, because this thing is huge and the fuselage is too thick to hold with only one hand while holding the radio with the other. I was worried about crashing it though, so I did use as many cameras as I could so I can at the very least catch every possible angle if it crashes. I even did a live cast of the takeoff on Facebook. You can check that out in my feed. So once all the preparations were done and I had thoroughly checked to make sure that all control surfaces are working well and responding correctly, it was time to throw this one in the air, and since I had to put the radio down in order to hold the plane with two hands, I flipped the auto switch with my foot, trying to be gentle enough so I don't step on the radio. I was quite relieved when the plane took off perfectly and with authority, although not surprised, because from my experience with the XUAV clouds, that is what I've learned to expect from plane during auto takeoffs. Perfection, and this was no exception. Also, the fact that the Crosswind was running at a rather modest 3.6 kilograms of all-up weight should have helped with the takeoff, as it certainly felt like the motors might be close to 1-to-1 thrust-to-weight ratio. After the plane had gained some altitude, I switched to fly-by-wire A mode and flew around for a bit, and honestly, I felt the plane super stable and floaty right from the get-go. It just wanted to stay up in the air, and that builds up confidence quickly. I wasn't sure what to expect, but honestly, that level of stability was a tad bit beyond what I expected, and keep in mind that the PIDs are the default ones. I was impressed for sure, so naturally, you may have guessed it, a stall test was next on the agenda. Since I was already in a stabilized mode, went with it, dropped the throttle and pulled on the elevator, and pretty much nothing interesting happened. The Crosswind went comfortably under 35 kilometers an hour, then under 30 kilometers an hour without really tipping a wing or shaking too much, which was really surprising. Sadly, no DVR of that particular part of the flight, but I do remember the values because I was looking at the screen at the time, not the plane itself. Then, when the speed gets too low, it would sort of nose in, pick up some speed, and then again this would repeat. Only time when I managed to get something of a tip stall behavior was when I tried to slow it down against the wind with high elevator and some throttle, and it went down to about 17 kilometers an hour ground speed before it leaned to the right in a sort of tight turn more than a spin, and the moment I let go of the elevator and gave it some throttle, it leveled out. What is shocking to me is the ability of this plane to fly seemingly reliably and be stable around 30 to 35 kilometers an hour, which I did not expect. True, right now it is relatively light, but still, even with more weight, this stall behavior will not change much, which is reassuring. Only thing that will change is the speed at which it will dip that nose, but honestly, this feels like one of the most stable planes that I have owned and flown, but I am curious to see if that will change when I load it up some more and when I move the CG further back, looking for that improved efficiency. And now let's get to the not so good parts of this model. Just prior to the Maiden Flight day, I saw on RC groups that people were complaining about the angle of the horizontal stabilizer, which caused it to go all over the place in the air when flown in manual mode, and the effects were much more pronounced when the speed is high. Naturally, that didn't really scare me too much, because back in my foam board days, I rarely kept to tested models and tended to come up with my own designs, and trust me, you have no idea how much effort it took to rein some of those failures in so they wouldn't crash in the first 30 seconds. Also, having flown the plane in a stabilized mode for a while now told me that whatever problem there is, the autopilot seems to be handling it pretty well, so I switched to manual mode and prepared for the end of the world, which never came. Granted, I did have quite a lot of servo travel on all control surfaces and no expo to speak of, so that in itself does make a model quite twitchy and nervous, but once I reined that in, there really was something a bit off with the tail, as the plane was constantly trying to nose down. Flying it in this state was definitely not a pleasant experience, because it really was all over the place. But funny enough, switching back to fly-by-wire A mode makes all of this go away and makes the world a better place again. Now, just in case you're wondering, my CG point is at 95mm from the leading edge, not the 105mm that the manual recommends. I did that because I was advised to try that CG location as it was safe for the maiden flight. Apparently 105mm is supposed to be the high efficiency CG point. I am guessing having a bit of a nose heaviness also does help to nose down the plane in addition to what the tail is doing. After that flight I did talk to Charles, that is the guy behind My Flight Dream, and he told me he's testing out a new tail, supposedly a fixed one, which also includes a better thought out elevator, though when it will be available I do not know, but he seems to be aware of the problem and, as far as I understood, is working on solving it. That being said though, I can't help but think about something here. The Crosswind is almost a 100% mapping oriented plane, as there is no provision on it for FPV gear, and its price point is a tad bit over what most people would consider reasonable for an FPV platform. With that in mind, it stands to reason that most people who buy this would pretty much only have to press a button, the plane takes off, flies through its mission and lands, and they would never have to fly it themselves or touch the remote anyway. Given how well the autopilot handles the tail angle issue, I am willing to bet that some users will never know there is even an issue with that, as long as they don't go into manual mode for one reason or another. I know this may be naive thinking, but personally I do plan to use the plane for FPV of the long range kind after I'm done squeezing all of the efficiency that I can out of it, and I do pretty much fly only in fly-by-wire A mode, and I have seen that the autopilot handles this issue just fine, and it doesn't seem to affect the stall characteristics or the overall stability of the plane in any negative way. So really, this tail situation isn't going to bother me too much for the time being. True, this day was not the windiest one, but still, this plane definitely impressed with its stability even with the default parameters, and I haven't even gotten to tuning, assuming it even could get better. I guess those huge wings do make a difference, and they must have designed something about them right if they refuse to stall. Overall, yes, the plane does have a problem with the angle on the horizontal stabilizer, and regardless of the fact that I don't mind it because the autopilot can handle it, it is a problem and it needs to be fixed. So I'm hoping My Flight Dream will be ready with the new tail assembly soon enough and will ship replacement parts to their customers. Apart from that, I have to say that I'm quite pleasantly surprised by the rest of the flight characteristics of this plane, its stall performance and overall stability. The inner space of the fuselage is absolutely huge, but whether that is a good or a bad thing would be decided by the people who are going to be doing mapping with it, as they will have to find a way to mount the necessary equipment in there. When it comes to FPV, it will need some mods, and I will wait for the new tail to come before I put some antennas on it, because yeah, I don't plan on removing it too often, so might as well make good use of it. We'll also have to figure something out for a gimbal at the nose section and a better camera mount than fiber tape, but all in good time. I do plan to fly this one a lot in the coming weeks, and will also get the Believer back up in the air so I can put them head to head for a small comparison, but I do have to say the Crosswind does appear to be more stable and to have better stall performance than the Believer, at least in my experience with both planes so far, but more in-depth testing will be needed, so stay tuned. Now, you can find links for the stuff shown or used in this video in the description below, and using any of them to buy literally anything from those websites would help support this channel, and you will have my eternal gratitude, as that is also how I make my living. Another way you can support me is Patreon. The link is also there, and my heart goes out to all the people who have supported me so far in any way and would continue to do so. If you have enjoyed this video and found it useful, please feel free to like, share and subscribe if you haven't already, and also consider following me on Facebook for more regular updates. I wish you happy flying, and until next time.